We cannot hear you.
Thank you for that speech. For the next speech, I invite the leader of opposition. You have 7 minutes. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So basically, with the opposition and the government, we can agree on the definitions internally that taxes have to be obligatory and charity is optional. And we are debating this debate having these concepts in mind. This would lead to my first argument, which is it would lead into the case I'm going to provide, is that taxes lead to better distribution of money and better outcomes. So this is what we believe in the opposition team the government is able to provide by enforcing taxes. First of all, taxes are obligatory, charity is not. Charity is about people wanting to give to this cause, while the government is enforcing taxes on people and chasing people who are trying to get rid of taxes and not pay taxes. And this is a very important point here, that charity is driven by emotions. Taxes are driven by data. They're driven by the government wanting to do things. Now, they said that the government is not always care about the people, they only care about power. I will talk more about this in my speech. Now, taxes provide a stable income for ones who distribute money to the ones to the needed side, and the government is the best possible one to know where to invest this money. Now, why we emphasize on the word stable? Because taxes are continuous. Charity is basically someone wanting to pay money for a certain cause. Now he is not obligated to pay another time, and this cause, when they get this money, the people who need it, this will lead to some sort of like a dependency on this money, while the stable government funding is stable because taxes are paid monthly. While charity, you can't just gonna enforce someone to pay charity on monthly basis, for example, because this would not make it charity anymore. Now, I would mention a couple of important causes why we think the government is the best option to handle taxes and to distribute money to the needed side. First of all, they have the data to know where the money is needed. They know where people are lacking money. Okay, they say that the current, let's say, organizations or funding organization, the ones who are actually surviving in this harsh world have the best providers, have the best workers. Well, okay, they might do because of how the system is based right now, but the government has all the data. The government is way more effective and sufficient than these organizations still. And we think they know where the money is needed. They are acting and distributing money based upon need. They're basing upon data. They know where the money is needed because they have access to every single information in the country. That's why we think they will know where they should put this money. Now, the second cause is they have the power to chase down after rich people who are refusing to pay taxes. That will come the stability factor in. We think that people should have a stable income for not a stable income, the stable money supply for the cause is needed. And the stability provide for continuous building projects, not just short bursts of money, not just relief money. You can help people over years. They not gonna just need one big payment. They will need a constant supply to maintain the uplifting of any people who are suffering. They're gonna build a hospital, they're gonna build it on one foundation. They might build it with one big cash of money, but to maintain it, they need to get more money. So that where the continuity of the income comes in, and it's very important. And another point is that corruption is fought easier at the government scale than charity, because the responsibility of the charity organization is like they are held to way less responsibility than the government. And this responsibility is what enforces the government to be more effective and sufficient. Now, they might argue that the system of government is different from place to place, like the US, not like China, not like Russia. But let's say that we want to have the idea of a democratic government that has the people influence the corruption and have people fighting and calling for fighting the corruption, and having this influence would lead to have the corruption fought easier, way better on the government scale than it's on a charity scale, because charity are not held to responsibility by the people. They're basically charity organizations. Now, a very important point that the Prime Minister mentioned is that the government would just want to spend money where they think they want, because, well, we say, yeah, that's true. We agree with that. But even if the government has a holistic view, they're basically running the country. They're not just basically helping someone who just needs some help, people who are patients need some money. Okay, we agree that these people deserve help. And the government otherwise is helping everyone. They have a holistic view. They have millions of people who need money to stay alive and stay in a good condition. And this would lead to understanding that charity is a salvage act. Well, what do you mean by that? Basically, when we think about, for example, healthcare, charity is donated to cancer patients, while government is funding preventive medicine. Now, effectively, I'm a medical student, and I know for sure that prevention is better than treatment. Prevention is the first step. How many foundations do we see going for preventive medicine? Not many. While, an example, for most of the funding is going to cancer research, is going to we're not saying that's wrong, but we say that the government is basically running the preventive medicine field, because they know, because they're not driven by emotion, they're driven by data, that the preventive medicine is a better choice to make a bigger effect on this country. Now, saying all these causes, we can understand that this having the government getting taxes and providing welfare by these taxes is the better option here. It's continuous funding, not just to help momentarily, but to change the reality, as the stability of the income is better than non-reliable, just donating as these people want. But these people, okay. So basically, my first argument is sums up by saying that the government is the best option for providing this welfare enhancement. Now, my second argument is, although the government might invest money in ways superficially not relevant to the welfare of the people, it will eventually well. For example, we think about the American Aid Organization. It's funded by the government to give aid to countries who are like needing this kind of aid, whether it's like infrastructure, developing countries, all that stuff. Well, Americans basically hate this, but when you think about it, it's basically creating a bigger market and improving the relationship between the country, that is the US, with this developing country. This open up for relationship, this open for more US interest in that country, the bigger market for providing American goods. So basically, though it might seem on the superficial level that it is not going with the benefit of the people, when we think about it and we study it more, we think it's in the benefit of this nation, and this I would like to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. For the next speech, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister. You have 7 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, let's get a clear description of our world, how we see it. In the world of the opposition and in the status quo, we have like 5% money are going to charities right now, and 95% of welfare money are going to the government. In our world, we will see almost probably the same amount of money will go to the charities. Why? Because we are choosing the world, so we are agree that this world will exist for some time, and there will be a clear cut and important social norms that will force people to donate money to charities. And if you are not donating any money to any charities, you will receive a hard social pressure to do so, and it will be inappropriate to not donate any money to charities. And this social norm will be like a powerful tradition, and this tradition will force you to subscribe to some charities, to choose some charities, to some, I don't know, social network activity, like you advise in some good charities to your friends, so on and so forth. And also this will work because everybody will now have a big sum of money to donate whoever they want to help directly. If, for example, if you are a liberal in USA and your government cut any funding for the migrants, illegal migrants, you will be able to help them directly by just donating to according charity. In a status quo, you will not have enough money to do so, and you don't have a powerful social norm to force you to do so. But in our world, almost all liberals who are supporting illegal migrants in USA will donate their money because it is appropriate to do so, and everybody doing exactly that. And if you are not donating anything, you will not be you will not deserve to call yourself a liberal. Other Now, about criteria, how we are choosing the world, why our world is better. The criteria to choose our world, we believe that everybody weak should have a good, should have a chance to receive a real good and professional help. And not just government help, because in status quo, government is probably effective on a big scale, but on a small scale, government is not effective at all, and government is not able to provide money to everybody who needs it. Government is not, for example, in Russia, government is not able to provide any good help for people with AIDS because half of them are not even diagnosed. Nobody cares about them. Everybody still believes that this is an LGBT disease, and you should only charity organization are trying anything to real work on prevention of this disease. This is the answer to the leader of the opposition. In Russia, only charity organization are trying to actively prevent it by distributing condoms, for example, by an arguing for sex education, so on and so forth. So what next? Some improvements to the speech of my teammate. First of all, okay, you can have a question.
If we assumed in another world that where the government funded these immigrants, these like marginalized community, these people, would you think they would have a better condition that they are now in this world with the charity funding in place?
In our world, they will have a better funding and help on average, because in our world they will have a better professional, and always they will have at least some charity help into them, but not in our world. I can't completely understand the question. Okay, so what next? In our world, charities will be more effective because, first of all, we already have an effective altruism movement. We have randomized controlled trials that will estimate which intervention will work and which charity intervention will doesn't. For example, Fund Against Malaria is the most effective because you donate $5 and you will help and you will save in one individual life. And we believe that in the world, well, not only $10 billion will be distributed through charity, but $1 trillion will just distribute through charities. We will have a widespread, more effective altruism movement. Everybody will want that their money will be distributed effectively. Everybody will want a clear and good reports, and so effective charities will be more effective than even now, and everybody will do some randomized control trials to see other interventions help really work. And what else do we have? So to tie it to the criteria that I described in the first part of my speech, we essentially government is not effective also because government, the decision to help somebody is always a political one. You can't just, in the Russian government, just to help people with AIDS, just help LGBT people. In USA, you can't just help an illegal migrants if you are Trump, because your own voters will not support that at all. So it is always a political decision. It is always a scale of some 4 years electoral cycle or something like that, and a major groups of people will be denied of their help. Some people who suffer from unemployment will be denied of their helps. AIDS people, old but not old people in some countries will be denied their help. But in our world, like 40% of the population, for example, who are lost in the election, but they will be able to distribute large sum of money to directly help whoever they want to, and then we have a simple result that everybody we will have at least some money and at least some professional and at least some charity helping for them, because there will be a social norm and the amount of distributed money will be more large. So therefore we have a criteria that everybody should receive a good help and some money. and only in our world, everybody who are lost the election will still receive help that they deserve. So therefore, our world is better than world of the opposition.
Thank you very much for that speech. I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. You have 7 minutes here.
Just 1 second, I'll put my timer. Okay, so I will start my speech with answering to a few points that were presented to us by the government. The prime point was that the government is not effective in distributing that money, simply because they will support things or causes that they find are beneficial to them politically instead of people like the LGBT plus community or unemployed people or these things. Well, when there is one party that is distributing money, all eyes of citizens are on that party. So what I'm saying is it's easier for the people to find corruption in their government when there is only one thing to look at, one thing to hold accountable for that money that they are getting. Unlike charities, which what can a charity lose if they are discovered to be corrupt? They can only lose the company, which is usually run by rich people who own 100 other more companies. When the government loses the trust of its own people, they are losing the control of the country. They have a much bigger loss. So the government will feel obligated to answer to people's wants and to give that money to the causes that people actually support. The other point was about distributing money, which, as my partner mentioned and explained very clearly, people do not know where should the money go. They do not know if this school or this education system needs more money versus the healthcare system. They cannot decide because they don't have data, and even if they do, not everyone, most people in society cannot make the decision based on the numbers. They make it usually used on based on if they have a sick relative or if they have a lot of kids that need schools. So we are saying that the government is a lot more capable of distributing that money to the people who deserve it and to the causes that actually deserve it. Now, this allows me to move on to the first argument that I will present to you, which is that taxes include services. Let's go back to what taxes really are. They are percentages of services that are provided by the country, like water or electricity. So taxes are basically an income for the country. We are paying the country because they are providing us with roads, they're providing us with education, they're providing us with healthcare, all these services that are provided to us by the government. We are essentially paying them back so they can provide them to us. Part of the taxes does go to helping other causes. However, we're essentially paying for the services that we are getting by our government. So saying that we prefer giving money to charity, let's say a charity that supports LGBT plus community, this is saying that we want all those services for free from the government to support other people. Now, what is the impact of that? The impact is that less money will go towards services, which means we'll get less quality of life. We won't get the same things that we were getting when we were paying taxes. This can lead to, in extreme cases, to fighting the government, to blaming the government for not providing a good standard of life for its citizens. As we see, this is a huge impact that could lead to the falling of the country and a lot of fights and riots against the government. Now, my second argument is, I would like to lead to it by mentioning something that the government said, is that, 1 second, yeah, that people were, 1 second. Okay, so I'm sorry. As the government mentioned, the market of charity will expand widely whenever people are giving more and more money towards these charities. However, I disagree about about the impact that they mentioned. They said that this will optimize the market to leave the best charities out there, and they did not provide a good explanation to how this will happen. I would like to disagree with my second argument. Corruption will thrive within those charities. If people prefer to give their money to charity, well, that's great. But what are the consequences to this? Well, we'll see more and more charities popping up for all kinds of causes that appeal to all kinds of people, all kinds of citizens. While this might seem good, in reality, this only makes it harder for the government to differentiate between the good charities and the bad charities, and therefore they cannot warn people about who to donate to and who not to donate to. I hate to break it to you, but usually people are sold on charities very quickly. A very small percentage of people actually do the required research to make sure that their charities are even good. We have a good example, a charity called Ocean for You. They claim to sell bracelets to save the ocean. However, what we discovered is that only 1% of their money was actually going to that cause, while people thought that they were actually paying money to save the planet. And this charity is still running right now, even though we know that they're not actually doing what they're claiming to do. And let's think about how this will, how corrupt people will think about this. They will see it as easy money to open a charity and to advertise it for people, to tell people that this will support the cause that they want to support, that this will help them help the people that they want to help. It's not that easy to advertise for a charity. And people will pay them. People will get sold very easily on those charities. And at the end, this money is going to the rich people instead of the people who deserve it. The country is not able to investigate tens or even hundreds of thousands of charities because simply people are not focusing on one or like one entity that is providing this money. There are hundreds and tens of thousands of these charities that are giving people giving money to whoever they want. So what is our team telling you? No matter how good the intention is, the impacts are what we should look at. The impacts that we provided, or what the world will face, is first of all unequal distribution of money, meaning causes will be supported on the backs of other causes if people decide to give their money to charity. Also, less money will go towards services, which leads to bad life quality and maybe eventually blaming the government for this life quality. More and more corruption between those charities, which will lead to money bleeding out of the country and going to the pockets of the rich people, while the citizens think that they're actually supporting and making their country better and better. And I would like to emphasize at the end that we're not saying that people will not donate whatsoever. People will still donate, like we see today, to their charity while paying their taxes. And this is why I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
That's just a moment. All right, to open the debate on the closing tables, I invite the member of government. You have 7 minutes here.
So before I start my speech, I'm going to do a bit of framing. So in the status quo, the government spends vast amounts of money on things like healthcare, the military, agricultural subsidies, infrastructure, and so on. If this motion passes, the government can no longer afford all of these services, although they will still afford some of them due to the continued existence of corporate taxes, value-added taxes, capital gain taxes, and tariffs, and so on. So the key question is, will charity, which is replacing some of these taxes, still be able to provide these basic services that the government used to provide? And is the money that switches from charity or to charity from taxes spent on better causes than those tax dollars were spent on? And are they spent more efficiently? And we're going to argue that in a lot of the cases, the charity money will be spent on the same causes as the tax money, but it will probably be spent more efficiently. And the main cause that we provide, or the main benefit that we provide, is that more of this money will go towards utility maximizing causes abroad than tax money does. So on things like, say, helping the very poorest in the world, as opposed to only helping the people in your current society. And we think that that's the key difference that will change in this debate. And that's what makes it worthwhile to spend more on taxes, more on charity as opposed to taxes. So what kinds of causes will people start to donate their charity money to? So obviously now, if the government is not providing as many services as it did before, like opening opposition explains, then some of the people will have to start providing these services themselves through their donations. So we think that causes that people would continue to be motivated to spend on include things like healthcare for everyone, and infrastructure, and education, because these are the types of things that like everybody knows is important, because everyone has visited a doctor and gone to school and driven on a road, and those provide very clear benefits to the community. On the other hand, the types of causes that the people donating to charity would not support, that the government currently spends vast amount of tax money on, are things like military expenses, agricultural subsidies, and like very unuseful infrastructural projects that are only politically motivated. So for example, in Finland, the government has to support the people living in far off lands, or like basically in the forest, because that's the ideology of the ruling party. And therefore they spend a lot of money on these infrastructure projects that like appeal to their base, because they want to maintain power. But these kinds of projects have very little support among the rest of the population, and these kinds of projects would get less money as a result of switching over to charity. And we concede that there are some important causes that like charity would not be able to account for, and those include things like homes for narcotics users and rehabilitation for pedophiles. But as I explained, like the corporate taxes and the value-added taxes and these things will still remain. So we do think that the government will nevertheless be able to provide these basic, unpopular, unsexy services that are absolutely necessary for society. And so I explained that people will continue to have an incentive to support the basic services that they need in their community. But I also argue that a lot of people actually currently would like to support causes that happen abroad. So that includes things like buying malaria nets for poor communities in Africa, and donating to like artificial intelligence research, and helping communities that suffer from natural disasters. And currently people do not have the extra income to donate to these kinds of charities, because they have to spend a lot of money on their taxes. And there's this narrative that the government is already spending money on like on foreign aid, and that the government is already doing what it needs to do, and you don't have to take personal responsibility for improving the world because you're paying your taxes and you're a responsible person therefore. But I think that if we shifted the responsibility more towards individuals, then they would also start to think more about what is it that I really want to do with my money. And they would start to notice that actually the people most in need are people abroad, and we should spend more money. I should send more of my money abroad rather than to some random theater project in my own community that currently the government would support. And why does the government currently support these kinds of things? Well, as OG already mentioned, and as I also explained, like the government has a lot of interest groups and lobbying groups affecting its decision making, and it has to appeal to all sorts of voters, and especially those corporate interests and lobbyists that want to advocate for things like big agricultural subsidies. So now I think we would be taking a lot of power away from these influential lobbyists, and people could decide for themselves what are the actual important things that they want to do with their money. And then moving on to the efficiency. So whether donations and charities would actually be efficient. Now, this was a big part of the debate so far, because from OG we heard that like the charities would create a market and competition, and therefore only the best charities would survive, and they would have to prove their efficiency to their donators. But on the other hand, on opposition, we heard that like government has benefits like providing continuous aid, which is more effective, and governments create less corruption and things like that. So how do we break the deadlock? Well, we think that it's important that on our side, people have a clearer connection and interest in where their money goes. So there's more accountability. Taxes in the status quo are extremely opaque because now you pay your taxes and you have no idea where that money is basically distributed. It's distributed to 100 different causes and you don't agree with many of those causes. So you read in the newspaper that, well, my taxes are now being spent on like building a new highway somewhere far away, but you don't really have any kind of connection to that project. And in some cases, you totally disagree with that project. But on our side, people get to decide themselves where they're spending their money. So they're more likely to like actually track where that money goes. It can be an interesting thing for them to do. And we don't think that that will lead to more corruption because firstly, the amount of corruption is probably about the same, whether or not you're in a charity or a government. The amount of corruption largely depends on like the customs in your society and the amount of trust in that society. So if you live in a high trust society, there will be little corruption in charity and in government. And if you live in a low trust society, there will be lots of corruption in both. And secondly, there will not be corruption because people donating to local causes, like I already explained they will personally be able to observe the effects of their donations. So if they donate to like a hospital building project and they notice that the hospital is not being built or that it turns out really badly, then probably they will notice. So when OO was talking about the amount of corruption, they talked about this like ocean preserving cause. But note that most people are not able to track the amount of preservation going on in oceans. So that's the type of cause where where corruption is actually a lot easier compared to the types of causes that we're talking about in discussion.
Time's up.
Oh, is that time? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
Alisher, we cannot hear you. Can you please turn your microphone on?
For the next speech, I invite the member of opposition. You have 7 minutes here.
Okay, I will start with the rebuttal. Our government tells us that if people donate to charities, they would donate more to other countries, like for example, African countries, like poor countries. But that's not the fact, because like let us look at the situation of what's going on right now. People have the opportunity to do charity, but mostly they provide charity for local organizations, not to the charity organizations which are in other countries. So there is no any point to believe that if people would be free from taxation, that they would provide more charity to the third world countries. Also, we were said that like government at the moment spends its time and money on projects that people don't like. But actually, if people don't like this project, then government would suffer at the next election, because the purpose of government is to satisfy the needs of people. Otherwise, they will be punished during the next election. So we can say that government actually tends to fulfill, to carry out projects which are important for people in their countries, that people find quite significant. Now I will explain why donation to charities is not efficient at all. Because when we are talking about the current situation, when we have a couple of charity organizations, you know, in a country, okay, maybe not couple, maybe dozens, it's easy to check them, okay? Society and media focuses on these charities, and they kind of like monitor these organizations. But if we are talking about the world with thousands of charity organizations in one country, it would be basically actually not impossible to check all of them. So charity organization, many charity organizations would be a fake charity organizations. They would just use this name charity to do bad things, like for example, laundering money. Today, many organizations, charitable organizations actually are doing this, because like if you have dirty money, what is the best way to launder them? You found a charity organization and then you invest your own money in this organization and you clean them. So charity organizations in our world are known as the best way to clean your money, to launder your money. And the more charity organizations we have in our society, the more crime we will have in our society, because it's very, very hard to check where this money are actually coming from, especially when you have such a big number of charity organizations. Also, like even if we imagine a world where there are only good charity organizations, you know, still it wouldn't be efficient, because like if you are, for example, government and you invest money in some project, you send this money directly to the institutions which are responsible for carrying out the project, like to hospitals, or for example, to institutions that deal with emergency situations in the country, or institutions that help like lethally ill people, like hospices. But if you have charity organizations, thousands of them, you have lots of bureaucracy, because this money first goes to these small organizations, and only from these organizations, this money goes to people. And each of charity organizations has to pay money for staff, have to pay money for offices, have to pay money for electricity, for equipment, you know. So basically, lots of money will be simply eaten by charity organizations themselves. It's easier if you have just one institution that directly distribute this money to institutions that are dealing with the problem, rather than to have mediators who are eating this money. Also, like what's important, my extension is this. With the wealth that our government proposes us, we wouldn't be able to carry out a big project, like long-term project. Because if government doesn't have money from taxation, they don't know how much money actually they have. And if they don't know how much money they have, they cannot start a big ambitious project, like for example, building the bridge that connects two parts of the city to make the life of people easier, or for example, to build a dam to prevent a flood. If you don't know how much money you will have in 6 months, in 1 year, you wouldn't start this project, because you cannot be sure that you would actually finish this project. And in the long term, that would be disaster, because actually government and country wouldn't be able to plan and carry out any big important projects that are very important for people. Also, like as we explained, government has big data that comes from different ministries, because all ministries in the government, they receive reports from people about how much money they earn, you know, how much money they spend. So basically, government has a big data, and they might be very, very clever in deciding how to distribute this data. But our government proposes us the world where all the payments and investments of people will be driven not by themselves, but by the media, because media at the moment influences the minds of people, and people would invest only in those projects that are in trend, that are popular, which are advertised on Facebook, you know. And all this would lead to the fact that many important projects and sectors of economy will be underfunded because they are not, for example, popular on the media. Not only this, we would have geographical underfunding, because like people who live in big cities, they would try to invest their money to charity organizations that are dealing only with local problems, you know. And some small villages, which are or suburbs, they wouldn't have like enough money to provide a welfare. Like in fact, should I end now? So we will have regions which would be like this economically well, and regions which would be very, very poor.
Thank you for that speech. For the last speech on the side proposition, I invite the government whip. You have 7 minutes here.
This is fine. Go. So the question in this debate when evaluating the claims made by either side is to ask, what do the worlds look like in status quo? Because a lot of the arguments coming from the opposition seems to rely on the fact that in the world that we have currently at this state, we have these problems with these charities. They are unaccountable. Some of them are scams and schemes, and otherwise there is not really attention to hold them accountable. However, when we move to the world of the government, in which this is the kind of like the primary way of giving resources to causes and individuals, and when there will be this sort of focus of this will be an individual responsibility to move these resources, because now in status quo we just believe, okay, we vote, the state decides the allocation by aggregating some sort of political will, and then we sort of have to subject to that will. Whereas in the world of government, we have this world of, okay, now we decide where we allocate these resources, and when there comes this sort of responsibility to allocate, and because the individuals do not have the necessary information to do perhaps these personal allocations, then there will be a need for such services, which will then generate this sort of a new way or new sector, which then provides this sort of accountability mechanism. So all of the problems given in opposition with regards to the charities are related to the current state and not the state in which the government lives with regards to this motion. Now, when we ask about what sort of things we should consider in this debate, there has been kind of like two fundamental questions. What is the question of allocation, how these resources will be allocated in the worlds, and which will be the more effective or which have the more valuable causes? Well, as explained well, there has been a lot of talk about how a lot of the resources will be moved away from the services provided by the state, and thus the well-being of individuals will be reduced due to this reallocation. However, there will be an incentive for the most individuals who use these services to sustain these services through their donations and thus provide the funding that exists for them as explained in the closing government, and thus it would be unlikely that these services would disappear. Now, what is the benefit of, in this case, for our side? Well, when the government wants to, let's say, or there's a desire for the government to reallocate resources, then they will need some level of political will in order to achieve this sort of an allocation. And obviously, if they are unable to achieve the majority support for this, then obviously the state is not really in a position to do this sort of allocation because it needs the political will. Whereas in the world, and a lot of causes which might not be, let's say, more political relevant, for example, for most individuals, the existence of, for example, LGBT causes is kind of like, sure, we accept their existence, but that's where the focus goes on, and then they believe, okay, the state should not perhaps allocate that much because it's not something that concerns, from their perspective, the vast minority of individuals. Whereas in our world, in which we have this sort of a focus of individuals making the decisions, being, let's say, on the nose of making these decisions when they come up, and they can then decide, okay, we will then change this allocation of resources when this new cause comes up, the cause that I desire to support, and then this cause now gets the resources more preemptively in comparison to the state, which has to wait for the political will to arrive from the other individuals. And thus it seems that in terms of getting the more preventative things, as talked about by Gov, we need this sort of a more reactive system, which is provided by the donation system that we have. Then there's a question of how charities are being made more accountable. Well, obviously, when people people can draw their resources from the charity, and obviously this can be extremely damaging for the charity's existence, and this can be done extremely quickly and very reactively to the charity's behavior, whereas for the state, if I do not agree with the behavior of the state, then I have to wait for the next electoral cycle. I'll take POI from.
The closing government arguments are based upon that corporation are gonna pay taxes, but the corporation are owned by CEOs who are the people making the money and who are individuals. Clearly, by the notion says we prefer them to donate instead of paying taxes.
Well, if they donate, well, in any case, as we talk about the allocation of resources, we believe that these donations provide the more effective way of doing the actual allocation as comparison to the taxes made by the state, because of the reasons explained before. And then there is a question of how to actually gain political will for the individuals. When state provides these sort of services, which were supported by the opposition, in this case, these services have to be provided in some sort of, let's say, equalist way, in sort of that most people have access to these services. But in some cases, it can be that some sort of unequal distribution needs to be made due to the fact that some groups are more vulnerable than others. The vulnerability which is perhaps revealed for certain individuals that belong to these groups, and thus they are being able to allocate these resources for these groups and don't need the sort of a state's will to do it, especially when the state takes taxes and then allocates them in less effective ways. So the basic case of the closing government is that the state is unable to perform the allocation as effectively as individuals. It is more reactive. It needs the political will to do it. And how the essential services provide, there's incentive to provide the essential services because most individuals obviously want to use them, and thus they're most likely to allocate them for these causes that prop up through the incentives of our world in comparison to the world of the opposition. And all of the corruption issues and other problems discussed by opposition are sort of related to the fact that in the status quo, there isn't really an incentive to have this sort of a business around charities because we sort of give the state this sort of responsibility, whereas this sort of an incentive becomes manifest when we are in the world of the government, and thus we are proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. For the last speech on the slide, I invite the opposition whip. You have 7 minutes here.
Okay, basically what we have at the end of the debate, we have the government that says that capitalistic model will work in the case of charity donations, like only the best charities will survive, and these charities would do a lot of good stuff to people. But as I explained to you that there would be lots of fake charity organizations that would not do good stuff to people. More so, most of the good charities, they would just eat money of people who donate them. Because if you're a charity organization, you have to spend lots of resources on actually maintaining yourself. So basically, there is no any point to believe that the more charity organizations would bring more good to this world. Also, we were told that charities will have the best researchers who know better than the government, where to put money and how to put money. But actually, government didn't explain to us why this is true. Why these organizations indeed, no thanks. Why these organizations indeed would have this best scientists and researchers. I would tell you that if charities can also be politically motivated and can be founded for political reasons, and researchers who work in this organization, they also might be biased and might be driven by other reasons rather than the reason rather than cause to help people. Government told us that like charity I have already explained all this stuff about efficiency, that like actually charity organizations wouldn't be efficient at all. People would not donate more to other states, like developing states, because they don't do it now. Why would they do it like in the future? And government tries to convince us that, at the moment government is not good because it invests in something that people don't need. But as I explained to you, like government actually tries to help those projects which is important, because otherwise they will be punished during next elections. And also government is accountable to people. So no, thanks. Especially if you're living in Europe or in America, like countries known as a democracy. So media has lots of resources to check the transparency and actually how the government works and uses this money. So what we have at the end? At the end, we have like that in case, like if people would spend money to charities rather than pay taxes, we would have a lot of corruption. And corruption is related to crime, because corruption and crime go hand in hand. So basically, it's not only that like your own money would be actually spent in vain. No, actually, corruption brings crimes to the street, because those things are always connected. We would have lots of bureaucracy and middle bureaucracy, and
Point?
Yes, okay, yes, thanks.
So we explained that governments are massively influenced by lobbyists, because lobbyists provide them politicians with money, and they want to get re-elected with that money, and therefore the lobbyists influence the types of causes that governments spend tax money on. If individuals donate individually, then the lobbyists will have no power over them. Therefore, the causes will be better.
It would be easier for lobbyists actually to provide their message, because right now they wouldn't need even to go to government. You just need to buy advertisement on Facebook and target people through media with your messages and influence the minds of people. It's much cheaper than just to lobby your message through government, and much easier. You just need money to influence media, some media, and media would influence the minds of people. Also, no one, like in the case in the world where there are a lot of charities, you wouldn't even need to go to government, because you can just found your own charity organization and like collect money like for what you need, even if your course is wrong. But my main point, my extension is that like in the world that government proposes us, we wouldn't be able to plan and carry out long, ambitious projects that you cannot do with charity. You know, those projects require enormous sum of money, and this money can be collected only if every single person would give something for that project. Like as I told you, like to build the dam that prevents flood. You know, if you offer people to donate to this reason, first, not like even if many people would donate their money for that dam, it wouldn't be enough, because you need a big number of money from a big number of people to do that. And also, they might not believe it's important, because simply one person cannot see far. One person cannot like see the whole picture, while the government has all the data, and they can see that like if we don't build this dam in 2 years, like we will have a huge flood and millions of people will suffer. Such things you cannot let just the one single person to decide like whether we need it or not. There should be an institution that cares about it, an institution that has enough resources and money actually to carry out that project. Also, like I want to compare the world where media decides like what people need, and the world where state decides what is important for people. And as I've already explained to you, media is like, you know, it's a trend. Like today they have one trend, tomorrow they have another trend. But if you're a government, you have like agenda. You have agenda that you have to stick to, and you cannot go away from this agenda because it's so important. Okay, so basically, the world where people pay taxes and still they have possibility to do charity is better than the world where people can only do charity and are not paying any taxes. Thanks.
Thank you everyone for this debate. So please allow me up to 15 minutes and then we'll come back and give the call and feedback.